Okay, so as Ruth shared with you, we're talking about walking for the next 6 weeks or so. In case you didn't realize, this past week on Wednesday, we entered a time called Lent. And Lent is a period in the year for Christians when we prepare ourselves for Easter. Um, and I'm sure we're looking forward to Easter for all kinds of reasons. If you live in Northern Ireland, as I know at least one of you does this morning who's online, you've been told this week that by Easter, they will end the lockdown. Okay, the first weekend of Easter, second of Easter of April, they're going to end it. So we're hoping that we're going to be out of it before then, but who knows? We're looking forward to being out of it. So Lent is a period where we prepare for Easter, and we do that by thinking about our lives. As Ruth said, we are going to try to do some exercises together. Now, she shared the walks, the wonder walks idea, which we came up with, and we've given that to all primary school age children and parents in the church to try to do that. But as Ruth said, we can all prepare, we can all go for a walk. And what we're also going to do for each of you is every Sunday of Lent, so we'll do it today after the service is over, we're going to send everyone a Bible passage. And we would like you to read through that passage over the week ahead. You can choose to read the same passage every day if you like, and there's no harm in that at all, reading it over, meditating on it, or you might want to take maybe a verse or a small bit and read a bit every day for the whole week. So we'd like you to please do that, whatever way you want to do it, either on a walk or in the morning before you get into your day, or at the end of a day, whenever suits you. Please try to read the passage. But we also want you to consider doing 3 things, and it's on that video, but in case you haven't seen it, I want to share it with you. We want you to think about something that you could give up each week. It may not be the same thing every week. It might be something different. And maybe that's a good thing to try to do something different, because it's pretty hard to give something up for 5 or 6 weeks in a row. So maybe one thing to give up just for a week. It's a wee bit easier to maintain it if you're only giving it up for 6 or 7 days. Secondly, something to take up, something to do that week that maybe you don't normally do, something different. It might be going on a walk if you don't normally go on walks. It might be reading a book if you don't normally read a book. Whatever it might be doing a jigsaw puzzle like Mark, if you don't normally do jigsaws. Do something. It doesn't have to be something spiritual. Just try and do something that you don't normally do. And then thirdly, something to give away that week. Something to do for somebody else, because Lent is not just about personal reflection. It's about thinking about other people, either people we know, or just thinking about the world around us and the difference that we can make for somebody else. And again, that could be a simple thing like sending them a message, calling them, writing them a card. It might be taking a cup of coffee around and leaving it on their doorstep, or maybe making a meal if you want to do something like that. Or it might be something bigger for an organization, giving something to a charity or writing a note of encouragement to them. So please think of doing this, because we've got this period of time when we can reflect on these things and we can let it go by so quickly. Now, back to today. We're thinking about going for walks with Jesus over the next few weeks. And we're going to base this on the Sermon on the Mount. And what we want to achieve in this series is this. We want to think about how we can learn to influence the world around us. That might be some people that we know. It might be bigger than that. And sometimes that can be a challenge. We live in a very broken world, a difficult world. We live in a painful world. Sometimes we try and make a difference and we don't think we're making much of a difference, or the problems seem to be too big. Like there's coronavirus, which has affected the whole world, every country of the world. And so we give up. We think, well, I can't make any difference, so I'm not going to do anything. Well, this morning's message hopefully will challenge us to think a little bit about that. because no matter what you do, even if it's for one person, you can make a difference. And so we want to learn as we go through this series what Jesus teaches us and what Jesus taught his first disciples about how to influence their worlds by following him. So, the setting, we're looking at Matthew chapter 5. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. But before we get to Matthew 5, I'm going to refer to the other two Gospels, because Matthew 5 is not the only Gospel that mentions this. In Luke, this is what Luke says. This is the setting for this sermon that Jesus gave. One of those days, Jesus went to a mountain to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Matthew doesn't tell us anything about Jesus praying, but Luke does. And so Jesus goes on this mountain. We're going to see a picture in a minute of what the mountain looks like today that he went up. But Jesus knows that God wants him to do something different is going to happen. It's going to be a key moment in his life where he's going to have to make a big decision. And that decision is, which of all of the followers who've been following him, men and women, which are the ones he's going to choose to be his core team, his inner team of followers. He's going to call them his disciples, the people who are learners or followers. In one way, they're all his disciples. These 12 men are going to be a special team that Jesus is now going to work with and teach. And these 12 men are going to be called apostles. And as you see on the screen, that means sent ones. So he's going to prepare them for a mission. He's going to send them off on that mission. That was the context that Luke says. Notice what Mark says. It says he mentions the 12 disciples. He appointed 12. And notice what he says, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. Preach what? The message of the kingdom, and give them authority to drive out demons. So Mark adds a little bit to this. He said he first of all chose these men that they would spend time with him. Jesus wanted them to be with him, to spend time with him, to listen to him, to have meals together, to go on walks together. And he wants that for us too. He wants us first and foremost to spend time with him. And in our busy lives, our busy world, it's always a challenge to do that. And maybe during this season, we can find ways like walks where we can go on those walks in order just to draw a bit closer to Jesus and talk to him and listen to him when we're outside. And he sent them to preach the message and to drive out demons. In other words, Jesus knew there was going to be opposition. There were going to be forces that we can't see with our eyes that are against him and against them. And he said, I'm going to give you authority to stop these things from influencing what you're going to do in my name. You're going to drive them out. The forces of evil and wickedness that you can't see that are behind people's lives, yeah, I give you the authority to drive them out so that people can come to know me. And then Matthew says, when he saw all the crowds that were there, he went up on the mountain and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them, saying. So, don't know if you've thought of that before. I remember years ago when I was a youth worker in Edinburgh, a film came out about the life of Jesus based on Luke's gospel. I think it was just called Jesus, or the Jesus story, Jesus film. And I remember the part in the film when it had Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. And there were hundreds of people around him, and he was walking among the people, talking to them. He'd be sometimes talking to children, sometimes to adults, sometimes to religious leaders, sometimes to his disciples, and he'd be walking around talking to them all. Well, that's not quite the picture that Matthew is giving us. Jesus actually leaves the crowds. The crowds are probably down at the bottom of the mountain, and he goes up the mountain a little bit and he sits down, and then his disciples, his followers, his pupils, if you want, his students, they go up and they sit down and they listen to his teaching. So the Sermon on the Mount in one way, is not for everyone. It's for people who really want to get close enough to Jesus to hear what he has to teach them. So here we go. If you ever have the privilege of going to Israel and you go up to Galilee, that sea that you can see in the distance is the Sea of Galilee. And this is taken from the mountain called the Mount of Beatitudes. It's not actually called that. That's what Christians call it. It's given another name by the Jews. But this church at the top of the mountain is called the Church of the Beatitudes. And it's a very interesting church because when you go inside, the main auditorium is octagonal. It's got 8 different parts, and every part of the sanctuary has got one of the Beatitudes of Jesus that we're going to look at this morning. Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, all around the inside of this church to remind people of this teaching. And the bottom picture is what you can see if you look down from the mountain over the valley, over the plains to the Sea of Galilee. You can see all around that area. And a Catholic scholar once said this. He says, from here, from this mountain, one can see virtually all the places where Jesus lived and worked. You can see places like Capernaum and Bethsaida. You can see Nazareth and all the towns around the Sea of Galilee. You can see the sea where Jesus would go out on a boat with his disciples, and sometimes there was a storm, or sometimes they went to the other side. So it's a beautiful place. That's where this is set. The Sermon on the Mount, John Stott says, is probably the best known part of Jesus' teaching. Many people know about the Sermon on the Mount. Even people who aren't Christians know about the teaching of the Sermon on the Mount. Even if they don't know it's called the Sermon on the Mount, there's things that Jesus said, like love your enemies, etc., that people will have heard of. Do to others what you want you would have them do to you. Turn the other cheek. These are all statements from the Sermon on the Mount. And Stott says, even though it might be the most admired, it is probably the least understood and certainly the least obeyed. In fact, the great Hindu leader Gandhi once said, if more Christians lived by the Sermon on the Mount, he would probably have become a Christian and not been a Hindu. In other words, in a country, the country of India that he lived in, that was ruled by the British, who were supposed to be Christians, he said that I just can't find people who live by the Sermon on the Mount, and I wish they would. Stott says it's the nearest thing to a manifesto that Jesus ever uttered. It's his own description of who he wanted his followers to be and what he wanted his followers to do. And notice that it's about being first. And once you then become a follower of Jesus, then it's about your actions, and it's about living that out and doing what he wants us to do. It describes what human life and communities are like when they come under the gracious rule of God, the result of which is a counterculture modeled on Christ. That's from John Stott. So, are you ready to pack your bags? Helen told us this morning about going on a holiday and some of the things we need. I want us to try to pack our bags this morning. Now, notice there's a pair of boots in this picture. I received a brand new pair of walking boots this week. My wife found them for me and got them for me, and I'm going to be looking forward to putting them on and trying to use them and go on some walks. I needed a pair of walking boots. The ones that I have are older ones and they're kind of hurting my feet, and I don't really want me to put them on and go for a walk. So this will encourage me to go on more walks. And they're an important thing to take in your bags if you're planning, obviously, to do some walking on your holidays. I noticed that Helen and Chris sometimes talk about the Lake District, and I know they love that area. So do I. And I was thinking about that this week when I was preparing this message. For 14 years in my life, when I was a youth worker in Edinburgh, and then when I was a pastor in York, I used to go to the Lake District every single summer. And I used to go to a camp called Bassenfeld Camp that's right beside a little town called Bassenthwaite. And there's lots of lakes and mountains. And every year I used to go there to do talks for young people, but to go hill walking. And I still, I think, have a pair of boots that I used all those years ago, well worn out now. And I used to love doing it, going the walks, different mountains around the Lake District, and give me a chance to get out, obviously, but to talk to young people. And I had many, many, many great years and great conversations walking in the mountains of the Lake District. It's a great place to go, not too far for us. So maybe you want to try it when you're able to get down there and go for some great walks. But I'm thinking about not so much items for your bags, but attitudes. And we're thinking today of what are called the Beatitudes. In other words, the attitudes that followers of Jesus should have. These are attitudes that Jesus wants us, if you want, to pack in our bags, to take into our lives. Now, just like packing a bag, you've got to put a bit of effort into it. They don't just naturally come. You don't just naturally do these things. You've got to think about them. And again, Lent is a good time to think about, are these attitudes in my life? Have I let some of them go? Do I practice them? These are attitudes that we have. Jesus says in Matthew 5, blessed are the people who have these attitudes. And what he means by that is two things. It's the idea of being happy or glad about something. Some of the translations of the Bible say, happy are people who do these things. So Jesus is basically saying, listen, if you go on this journey with me, where we're going to, you will be glad if you pack these things. You'll be happy if you take these things on board. They will help you for the journey. And when we go on the journey, you'll be glad you packed them. There's also the sense of contentment in this word blessed. It means you're kind of settled, you're content, you're happy with what you've got. You're not regretting, oh, I wish I'd taken that, or I wish I'd that with me. You're content with what you've packed on the bag. And that's what Jesus means. These are the important attitudes for life and life with Jesus. And it's interesting what he does in this. He talks about the blessings, but he also says at the end, this is what these people will receive. So he wants them to imagine about going on the journey and what it'll be like when you get to the end of your journey. What will it be like when you reach your destination? Now, again, going back to Helen's story, they're in the car, they're going maybe down to the Lake District for their holiday, and all sorts of stuff's in the car, all right? And maybe one of the kids says to their mom, Mom, why have we brought this? And Helen says, you wait till you get there. Wait till you get to the Lake District, and then you'll see why you need that. And someone else says, are we there yet, Dad? And Chris says, hold on, we're nearly there. Okay, just wait. You'll be glad when you get there, because then you'll be able to use that. Okay, that's what Jesus is trying to do with the disciples. He's trying to say, listen, guys, these are the important things for life, because when you get to your ultimate destination, that's what life will be like for you. And we'll come on to that in just a moment. He's talking about the kingdom, and he's talking about living in the kingdom now, what that's going to be like. But he's also saying one day when life is over, you're going to be in God's kingdom. You're going to be in heaven if you want. You're going to be with God. And when you get to that place, all of these things that you've been taking on the journey will make sense to you. So let's go. Let's look at the items for the journey. Okay, number one, humility. Jesus says in verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit. And he's talking about the attitude of humility. I'm not going to try to unpack why he calls it poor in spirit, but he's trying to describe people who maybe have chosen to let certain things go in life. In fact, in Luke's gospel, he just calls them the poor. Okay, to let things go because there's other things that are more important. In other words, we can let our lives become cluttered, can't we? If we're all honest, we can. With so many things in our lives, and we think they're all important, and they're not all important. Okay, and Jesus says the starting point for the journey is humility, saying, what can I do without? What can I learn to do without for a while? Okay. And sometimes we have to humble ourselves. We get a bit full of ourselves sometimes, think, well, I can't live without that. Well, maybe we can. Maybe we can. And so having this humility is the starting point for the journey. And notice what Jesus says. There's two times in these Beatitudes, he doesn't talk about the future, he talks about the present, at the beginning and the end. So he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And what he's saying is, if you're humble, if you have humility, you're on the road, you're on your way, you're in the kingdom, you've already started the journey. And without humility, the journey doesn't begin. Jesus said on many occasions, if we want to know God in our lives, if we want to follow him, we have to humble ourselves. In fact, on one occasion, he said, you got to become like a little child. Okay, you got to come to me and just trust me and put your pride to the side. Forget about all the things you think are important. Humble yourself, become like a little kid again, and come and hang out with me. Humility is the first attitude for walking with Jesus. Number two, empathy. Now you say, where do I get that from? Well, he says in verse 4, blessed are those who mourn. And Luke is even stronger. Blessed are those who weep, says Luke. But Matthew's not saying you need to go around with a sad face all the time. He's not saying that. And unfortunately, sometimes as Christians, we can come across like that. You know, we're too serious and we're too sad. And people say, I don't want to hang out with these guys. That's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying when you go on the journey, you're going to meet people who are hurting. You're going to see things in life that are going to be disturbing. Okay. And what do? Do you ignore it? Do you ignore them? Do you walk on by? Or do you try to empathize with people who are struggling on the journey? Maybe you're going on your journey and you see somebody that needs a bit of encouragement, but you don't bother to help them. Maybe you see somebody who asks you for something, and you walk on by and you don't try to feel what they're feeling. He says, on another occasion, don't judge people. Try to empathize with people because they need to be on the journey too with Jesus. And Jesus says, maybe we need to stop for a minute and we need to be sad for them. We need to be sad for what has caused that person to be in the state that they're in. Don't judge them, but try to get in their shoes for a minute and empathize with them and be sad for the things that have caused them pain. Maybe that's structural in society as a whole. Now, why should we do that? Jesus says, if you do that, you'll be comforted one day. Okay? You'll be comforted if you try to feel what others are feeling, and then you feel that pain and you take that pain on board. One day you're going to be in a place of comfort. But just think, if you do that with someone else, maybe you'll help them to feel that comfort. And he's not just saying these are things that will one day happen, but you don't get to taste them now. We will get to taste that now. You'll get to experience the comfort now, not in its fullness, but you'll get a taste of it if you come alongside people on the journey who need someone just to listen to them and help them out. Thirdly, meekness. Make sure you pack that in your bags. Jesus said, you're going to need it. What does that mean? Last year, I remember doing a whole Sunday morning on this topic, and I don't want to give all that to you again, but I need to repeat this because it's important to remember. And I know it's a cliche, but here's the cliche for the morning. Meekness is not weakness. Jesus is not saying you need to be this weak person and everybody tramples all over the top of you. Okay, don't ever have an argument. Don't ever get into conflict. Just be a little quiet person that nobody else notices. That's not what he's saying. Okay, these guys were strong fishermen. Some of them were tax collectors, and one of them was even a zealot. He was like a warrior. He was somebody who wanted to kill people and overthrow the government. He's saying to them, what I'm going to make you into are people you're going to be powerful, but you need to give that power to me. Let me take control of that strength that's in you, Peter. You're a strong guy, Peter. All right. Let me control your strength. Simon the Zealot, let me take all that passion inside you and let me control it. James and John, the sons of thunder, let me take your thunder and control it. Meekness means giving our strength over to Jesus and letting him take control of that. Doesn't mean being weak. It means we give our strengths and our abilities to him. And when we do, we become meek. We become people under control. Why will we do that? He says, one day you're going to inherit the whole earth. So for now, be content with where I've placed you. Be content where I've put you, and let me take control of your life right here, right now. Because one day you'll have the whole earth to explore for yourself. Number 4, he says, are you hungry and are you thirsty? Now, again, going on a journey, you need to make sure you pack a lunch, make sure you got lots of water, especially if you're going on a walking trip. And when we were in the Lake District, we used to buy this stuff called Kendall mint cake. It's this really, really sweet mint, but it gives you a lot of energy. And those of you who've gone for walks in the Lake District know what I mean. Okay, the fact there's a town down there called Kendall, you can buy the stuff. It gives you a boost of energy when you need that boost. You need water, because if you don't have water, you're going to be dehydrated and you won't make it. But Jesus is saying, on the journey with him, he says you need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. In other words, you need to be hungry and thirsty for doing what's right. Sometimes these words like righteousness, we make them more complicated than they are. Okay, it's not even a religious word. It's not. It's a practical word. It simply means do what's right. And he says, when you go on a journey with me and you walk with me, you'll see all kinds of situations that you think, that shouldn't be like that. Okay, I wish things were different. I wish I could make that situation different and change it. Jesus said, that's good. Be hungry for that. Be thirsty about doing the right things in life, because he says one day you will be filled. If you hunger and thirst for those things now and you want things to be different, one day he says you'll live in a world where things will be different and you will see that come to fulfillment. So he says, hunger for it. Want that in your life. Want life to be different. Want situations to change. And with Jesus, those situations can change. But he says, you got to be hungry sometimes and thirsty for it. Number 5, you need to pack mercy. Again, what's mercy? Mercy is not judging people. Mercy is holding back. Sometimes the judgment, the punishment, can I even say that? That you want to give to people. I'll give you an example. It's like going down the street, seeing someone who's homeless and saying to yourself, well, if he had only made better choices, he wouldn't be homeless. If only that person had listened to the advice that they were given, they wouldn't be like that, and you walk on by. That's not mercy. You might be right, but that's not what the attitude Jesus wants us to have. He says, don't think that way. Show mercy. Give the person something maybe that they don't deserve. Go and buy them a cup of coffee. Go and buy them a sandwich. Stop and say good morning to them. Say, God bless you, or whatever. Give them something. It's not that they deserve it. Do it because that's mercy. Mercy is doing something for somebody else that the person doesn't deserve. And that, Jesus said, will change people. Why should we do it? Jesus says, because when you get to the end of your journey, you will receive mercy. In fact, Jesus says in another passage, if you don't do this, you won't receive it. If you live your life judging others and not showing kindness to them, then you're not going to receive it. So mercy is a really important quality for the journey. We're nearly finished. A couple more things. Number 6, blessed are the pure in heart. Jesus is basically saying you need to have a healthy heart. Again, thinking of going on a journey. If you've got a weak heart, okay, or your heart's not strong enough, you may want to think twice about going on a long hike, okay? You need to have a strong heart in order to do that. But even in life, You need to have a healthy heart in life. There's lots of situations in life can damage us, can hurt us, can cause pain to our heart. And Jesus says you need to have a pure heart. You need to have the kind of heart that God changes. A pure heart is a heart like God's. A pure heart is a heart that's been forgiven. A pure heart that said, God, I need love. Okay, a pure heart is a heart that's been open to God's love. And that love has come flooding into our hearts and dealt with the pain and the bitterness and the stuff that's in there that can harm us. A pure heart is a heart that's been healed by God. Why do we need a healthy heart? Well, Jesus says one day you're going to be a place where you'll see God. And people whose hearts have been made pure will one day be in a place where they'll see God. And we'll be in a place where we'll see him perfectly. We need our hearts to be healthy. We need our hearts to be pure on this journey. Because if we're not, we try to go on the journey and carry this stuff inside us, it's going to damage us. It really is. And we're not going to be able to survive the course of the journey. Where are we going? Why are we on this journey? Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. We're on a journey with Jesus to bring his peace into situations. Ultimately, that's why we are Christians. Okay, as I said at the beginning, this is not just a personal thing of how can I be a more holy person? This is about preparing us to bring change into situations. It might be your workplace, might be your family, might be somebody you know in a relationship, might be something bigger. On this journey, Jesus wants us to bring peace. He wants us to bring shalom, not just a kind of arguments to end and that sense of peace, but he wants to bring reconciliation. He wants us to be agents of that and people that bring that and work for that. We might not always see it, but that should be our goal, to be peacemakers. Why? Because peacemakers are ones who will be called God's children. He said they will be called the sons of God, or in another translation, the children of God. People who want to bring peace, people who want to work for peace, people who want to bring that reconciliation are really God's children. And that's what Jesus is saying. And finally, final thing for the journey we need is endurance. Oh boy, do we need that. And again, notice what he says. He makes it personal in the present. Those who are persecuted for righteousness, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said, it's going to be tough. And I'm going to tell you now, when you pack these things for the journey, you're going out into a world that's broken and it's not going to always accept you. Sometimes you're going to try to do something good for other people and they're going to turn away from you. They're going to reject you. They're not going to want it. Sometimes they're going to be abusive towards you. Sometimes he says here, they're going to say all kinds of evil things against you and persecute you. And that word is a very strong word. It means to oppress someone. It means almost to hunt them down and do harm to them. Jesus said, that's going to happen to you. Are you in it for the long haul? Are you in it for the whole way? Because he said, that's what the journey is going to look like. So are you ready to go? Are you ready to go on this journey for the next 6 weeks? Are you ready for the journey of life with Jesus? Are your bags packed? Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but let's think about these things. I've just touched on these 8 attitudes very briefly this morning. That's why I want you to try to read this passage this week. Think about these 8 attitudes. Think a little bit more about them. Maybe spend a bit of time going on a walk, thinking about it and asking God, help me. Help me to develop that. Help me to produce that. I don't feel that I do that very well. I don't feel I have that in my life. Help me to pack that in my life a little bit more over the next 5 or 6 weeks. This series is about social justice. This series is about us going into our world and making a difference and bringing God's justice, which is another way of saying righteousness, the same word, bringing change to situations. Again, that might be a big thing for you, or it might be a small thing, something very practical that you just want to pray about and to do. Jesus says at the end of this to the disciples and to us, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world. In other words, he's saying you're the salt. You're the ones who will make a difference in this earth. Even when you don't think you're making a difference, he says you are. You're making it, you're savoring the world. Okay, you're preserving the world. That's what salt does. It savors and preserves. He said, so go and just be salty. Okay, you won't realize that you're being salty, but he says, just go and do it. And he says, let people see your good deeds. Now, that might sound a bit uncomfortable to you. You say, well, it's not about our deeds, is it? Well, actually, it is. It's about, because how are people going to see God if we don't do some good deeds? If you don't do something good for someone, how are they going to see? How are you going to be salty? So it is about doing some good things. Don't feel guilty about going and doing some good things. God's pleased when we do good things. And that's when the salt starts to spread in the earth. And finally, you are the light of the world. He said, so let's go and shine that light. And this kind of balances the other bit where you think it's not just about me, it's about God. And it is, because when we do good deeds, do you know what happens? Maybe in the actions that we do, people will start to see God. They'll see a glimpse of God. They may not realize it is, but they will. And it might open up an opportunity for you one day to have a conversation with someone about God. And Jesus says, when you do, shine a light. Shine the light on your Father in heaven. So, folks, let's go on the journey together. And I hope you'll join me in the journey for the next 6 weeks, and you'll learn something about what it means to walk with Jesus. Back to you, Ruth.